Spinal adjustments provided by Dr. Chad Rolfson. The Spinal Tuning Chiropractic Center is a Des Moines area low flat fee per month unlimited chiropractic care practice. When life happens, just adjust. Schedule today at spinaltuning.com.
Welcome to the Daily Planet. I am Jimmy Olsen, and this is my one-on-one with Father John Riccardo. He is the executive director of Acts 29 Ministries. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Jimmy. How about you?
I am doing well. It's like my brother from another zip code. How's that?
Yeah, I love that, actually. I miss you guys over there. How's life in the plains?
Well, things are, I think as we all know right now, things are kind of strange.
A wee bit. Yeah, too bad there's nothing to talk about.
Right. Nothing to talk about. We don't have one more thing to put in the tool belt to argue about or, throw insults about, because we have so many of those and nothing else to have those discussions, which, of course, that'll be part of that conversation today. But before we get into it too much, tell us about Acts 29 and kind of what the idea was behind that.
Yeah, well, maybe people know, maybe they don't. There's actually only 28 chapters in the Acts of the Apostles. And so the whole point behind the name is that you and I are living in the 29th chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. Or maybe a better way to put it would be that the Holy Spirit is wanting to write through you and me the next chapter of the church. So we're a nonprofit organization, and it's myself and 4 others. And we travel around the country, but we really focus in on 2 main things. We try to, we're a Catholic organization, we try to pour into my brothers, priests, who we've come to realize, especially over the course of the last year, traveling around the country, being with about 600 priests on retreat, are more often than not lonely, isolated, discouraged, beat up, playing all day playing whack-a-mole, the game where you just keep trying to find the thing that's popping up, and just need to get poured into. So we just try to revive priests, and then we also try to, we spend time, what we call equipping both clergy and then, the non-clergy who are in leadership roles in the church for what we call this apostolic age. So, and we mean by that, the Christian people have lived in 2 different ages, more or less, in the history of the church. One is an age where the culture around us was more or less formed by the gospel, and that had its own challenges. And then the other age that the believers have tended to live in is when the culture around us has not been formed by the gospel and is somewhere between ignorant or hostile to the gospel. And that's more kind of like the age that we're living in right now. And so we need to be careful that we don't use strategies and tactics that were better suited for a different age in the age that God has chosen us to live in. So that's some of the work that we do. We do it really because we have what we call 3 fundamental convictions. And I'll just run through them quick because I think they tie in with what you and I want to talk about. But the first conviction is that you and I aren't alive right now by chance. This isn't a fluke of nature. Like, God could have created you and me to be alive at any other moment in history, but we're alive right now. St. Joan of Arc once famously said, "I'm not afraid. God is with me. I was born for this." And we think that's true of every person who's listening right now. So that's really important because this age that we're living in, this is a pretty unique time in human history. And so our second fundamental conviction, we entitled "The World is Crying Right Now." And since COVID, it's more like wailing. And there's lots of ways to talk about that, but
yes, there are.
2018 was the first time in 100 years that the life expectancy in our country declined for 3 consecutive years, which is really striking.
Wow.
So 3 main reasons for that. Increase in suicide, the opioid addiction, and the cirrhosis of the liver amongst mainly 25 to 34-year-olds. And then you get COVID, right? And you've probably seen this stat. I think 25% of those between the ages of 18 and 24 in a recent survey had seriously considered taking their lives in the last month.
And I could see that just with the different surveys and studies that you found of the depression that has really taken over people because of the extra stress. I mean, all of a sudden it was, for guys, I got my wallet and my keys. For women, I got my purse with all my stuff. Now all of a sudden, wallet, keys. Oh, do I have my mask? Oh, do I have? I mean, you've got to really be aware of what's happening when you head out anymore.
Yeah, and just the impact. I mean, so without saying anything about masks, I don't want to get into that whole thing. But
no, absolutely. That's for a different one.
Yeah, we'll do that next time. I can't see you, and so it heightens immediately, like my defense against you, because I can't see your smile, and your smile wins me, right?
Right.
So the world is crying right now. But the third fundamental conviction is that Jesus gathers the believers, right? He calls people to himself. He founds the church, maybe we could say it that way, so that the world's cry could get answered.
Absolutely.
That's why we exist, right? So that people would come to know their identity as God's beloved sons and daughters, experience the regenerative power of the Holy Spirit, and help bring God's world back into harmony with the Father's plan. But the problem right now is the church is crying too.
Yes, and they have been for a while.
Oh yeah, it's been crying in lots of different ways, and Catholic Church is dealing with it in our own ways, and Protestants are dealing with it in their ways, and then now we're all facing decision fatigue, with all this COVID stuff, and so we need to start thinking about what is God asking us to do to transform our own lives personally and the places where we worship, so that we can be what he's called us to be in this age. Because the culture is screaming for help right now, and the only answer is Jesus. Because the root problem, right, is the human heart, and only he can fix the heart.
Right. Well, and this Right. Well, this really goes along with one of my other podcasts, The Gospel Road. And yesterday I was talking about Ephesians 4, and it, talks about, God creating, the pastors, the priests, the teachers, of course, I can't remember all that. You could probably rattle that off a lot faster than I can.
Teachers, pastors, evangelists, prophets, absolutely. Administrators.
See, I told you could. See, there you go. But I think the key part of that at the end is the whole point of equipping them. It's so we're able to build up one another, to inspire, to motivate, to encourage, and not tear each other down, which this is a perfect way to roll right into. Well, before we roll right into it, how can they find out more about Acts 29 Ministries?
Yeah, website is Acts 29, but it's in Roman numerals. And for those of us who forgot what Roman numerals are, so it's
what are those?
ACTSXXIX.org.
Well, fantastic. Again, chatting with Father John Riccardo. I'm Jimmy Olson, listening to One-on-One with the Daily Planet. And so, again, that rolls right into the meat and potatoes that I really want to have that conversation about, that I know you've had this conversation many a times, and you and I have actually shared it a little bit. And it's talking about, and not trying to even get too spiritual about the whole thing. I think, again, right there, our whole point is to build up one another, but going into the church side of things, of how we can't even get along. You have your belief, I have my belief, which, again, this is nothing new, because when you read about this in the New Testament, where, well, I'm under the teachings of Paul. Well, I'm under the teachings of Apollos. Well, guess what? Apollos was under Paul. You're learning the same. I mean,
right.
Is this a human we just, because we can't agree or sit next to each other in a pew, we have to fight? I mean, where does this go or come from?
Oh, isn't that a great question? I mean, it comes from a few places, I'm sure. I mean, it comes from our own insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from our competitiveness. It comes from our pride. I'm speaking about my own. So it comes from my pride, my insecurities, my competitiveness. I hate losing more than I like winning. But I also think, I don't know if you are aware or have come across there's a book that's out right now, which I've been really taken by, called Love Your Enemies, by
Okay.
a guy named Arthur Brooks. And one of the things that he identifies, which I think very much plays into where this is coming from right now, is he tries to make the argument that our culture right now is becoming a culture of contempt.
Okay.
And so, it's one thing to have, to hold positions closely, as we all do on various things, is going to lend itself to some passionate arguments. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I love to argue.
Right.
And we should care greatly about things, right? But we should always want to learn. Nothing wrong with any of that. What's happened, it seems to me, this is one of the points Brooks makes, and I think he's spot on. We're losing the ability to engage with people who have different viewpoints than ours, without holding them in contempt. And things like social media and other media have contributed to this. And so the difference is, what's contempt? Contempt is, man, you just disgust me. And I just wish you didn't exist, because your opinion annoys me, which means you annoy me, and there's no room for you. And
I think I've heard that before.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the MO for like everything out there. Politics, people have different thoughts about church, whatever. Like we have to learn. We're dangerously at the place right now, it seems, of not being able to have reasonable discourse with each other. And that's really scary.
Well, and the scary part of this is even me, because growing up in church, and by no means is this something new we've been dealing with. I mean, we've been dealing with this, well, back to the beginning of time, because we already mentioned the whole piece with Paul and Apollos. But I'm finding how it's, you could say, getting worse. I mean, we've talked about, at least I've heard, and I've experienced it, like the last election, and how people have isolated themselves from one another. There is no, for lack of a better way of saying it, that gray space to find where we can agree on something. But then even with the COVID thing, as we were talking about, people feeling depressed and not wanting to deal with it, again, not getting into this conversation, but, mask or no mask, again, there is a distinct difference between that. But again, no conversation able to be had. And I think we've got to figure out that bridge to, I even said it in an interview that I had a while back of, maybe everybody needs to go back to debate class and learn how to debate as an adult.
Yeah. Debate class. And I think we need to, I mean, like, for me, it calls me to, like, just examine my own heart. Like, are there people in my life that I hate? Because that can't be.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I can't hate, because if I'm hating you, the solution is to eliminate you in one way or another, to write you off, to shame you, to humiliate you, to cancel you, whatever, or to get violent, which is increasingly where we're going, unfortunately. We have to learn to not tolerate each other. We need to learn to love each other. And unfortunately, so many of us grew up in homes where we didn't even see that modeled in our homes.
Right.
So there just seems to be so much stacked against us. The good news in all of this is, like I try to say to myself all the time and other people, God isn't nervous right now, and that's a good thing. I might be scared to death, but God isn't nervous right now.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that whole loving one another, loving your enemy, which we've heard for years, but it's even that living in harmony. And I think sometimes even growing up in certain homes, you don't even see that harmonious living either with siblings or between your parents, depending on the situation that you grew up in. And you're right. I mean, where you're supposed to learn a lot of those important pieces at home, you're losing that. Or you have home pretty much saying, you know what, I don't want to deal with it. The schools need to teach my kids that.
Yeah,
where does that lead?
Yeah, that leads to where we are now.
Right. And it seems to be like a downhill spiral.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, John Paul II, who was Pope in the Catholic Church back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s, he used to always say the future of the world passes through the family, because it's in the family where you learn how to forgive, to love, to accept difference. And again, because so many of us all of us have such varied experiences and families, I think we're seeing in a bigger setting just how unfortunate our experiences in our own families has been, not just for us personally, but as a culture. We're living this out right now. Like many of us just didn't learn the skills to be able to say to somebody, hey, I'm sorry, or I forgive you, or will you listen to me, or can I help you? I mean, we're so quick to immediately presume the worst of one another. And we have to make a very intentional decision to not do that.
Or even being very automatically set on the defensive. You always feel, no matter what the reason is. And I'll admit, growing up in church and having the same feeling is you always have to defend yourself. And sometimes I think defending is not always jumping at that. It's, again, listening and trying to have a conversation. Another interview that I had earlier a while back, talking about in Peter, where it talks about when people are asking you about your faith, of having that quiet and gentle answer.
Right.
Be
not ready to give an explanation, but do it with hope,
respect.
And, as opposed to, I'm going to beat you over the head with my intelligence because you're obviously wrong because you don't hold the same opinion I do.
So I guess not that this is going to be certainly taken care of overnight, but in your opinion, and I know you have been dealing a lot, being a Catholic priest for so many years before, taking the role as the executive director of Acts 29. But I know you in the Detroit area, you actually worked with there was a community church or Protestant church that you worked with the pastor, and you kind of were guest speakers at, him at your parish and you in front of his congregation. I mean, so how did you kind of get past yourself, as we all do, to say, where do we have this commonality? Where do we agree that we can have a conversation?
Yeah. So for me, it came from my family. So I have 3 sisters and a brother. And then my folks, so my brother's gone, my mom and dad have passed away as well. But so my sisters, who are between 10 and 14 years older than I am, they left the Catholic Church when I was young, and they became evangelicals.
Okay.
I grew up in a home that was both Catholic and evangelical.
Oh, wow.
My mom was Methodist.
Okay.
Became Catholic when I was maybe 14. So I just grew up in a home where, clearly my sister wasn't the Antichrist.
Are you sure? Wait a minute.
At least she wasn't. It was clear to me. Maybe some others. So we learned to love each other and to be able to go at things more often than not charitably. Sometimes we crossed the line and we had to repent to each other. So I just grew up that way. It was a real gift for me. So I had a heart for unity and for seeing Christians work together from the time I was 8, at least.
Okay.
And then by the time I'm a priest, so I became real close with a pastor of a seeker church, a non-denominational church, maybe 2 miles north of me. We met through some mutual friends, and then we ended up doing, 7, 8, 9 things together at least, between his congregation and the place where I pastored. We did, worship nights together. We did, conversations on the Da Vinci Code when that came out. We did things on, fathers and sons. We tried to really demonstrate. I preached at his church, which was half ex-Catholic, which was no small thing for a guy to do. Guys all left the church, and here's the pastor of the nearest Catholic church, and I just asked him to come and preach here. I mean, he had to know some guys might leave and go back to the Catholic Church.
Right.
He and I think were passionate about demonstrating brotherhood and unity. and love for each other in the midst of disagreements on not insignificant things.
Well, I think you just brought up an important point right there, if I can kind of focus on that for a second. And that was when you said going in to speak at his church, he had some former Catholics, and there was that chance of them leaving and coming back to the Catholic Church. Is that maybe a lot of, especially amongst pastors, that fear that, I don't really want to say greed, but we'll use greed, because if they lose a person in that pew, they lose offering and tithes coming into that church. So is there some fear that they get into that of, well, we got to be, I'll be honest, even growing up, because I was a Pentecostal charismatic and we were a non-denominational, and it was even hard for us to even get with a Assembly of God or another type of charismatic church, because that it's almost like those pastors feared, because I can't lose anybody.
Yeah, so it might be true amongst evangelicals. Catholics don't give, so I don't think any Catholic was afraid of anybody leaving. For those,
I'm not sure how many actually even give on the evangelical side, but it's the thought in the back of your head.
Yeah, totally. I honestly don't know why that would be. Because from a practical standpoint, I had 12,000 people I was responsible for. I couldn't care for them all anyway. So,
right.
And the same with this guy. This place was a mega church with 4 or 5 campuses.
Oh, wow.
I think it's a call for us to just examine ourselves. Like, why am I fearful of someone moving into a deeper relationship with Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
Now, from a Catholic perspective, I'll be, transparent with you. Like, I want people to come to the Eucharist. That's my agenda. I want people. I believe and think the way I do about sacramental life and whatnot. And so I want people to access the Lord in those ways. Just to be clear. But at the same time, like, I saw my sisters leave the Catholic Church, their relationship with Jesus grew like nothing I'd ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Two of them have come back to the Catholic Church in maybe the last 20 years, but one's not. And she's a devout evangelical, and I love her to no end. And we talk about all sorts of different things. We share stuff back and forth. We're sharing videos and stories back and forth today on a whole sort of different topics. We've learned to love each other in the midst of difference. And maybe that's the crux. We don't seem to be able to love what's different than us.
That makes sense.
Right.
Well, like you said, as you were saying, for you, it's the Eucharist. You have to have that because that's your personal connection with Jesus Christ. That might be a very loose way of saying it, and I apologize. But at the same time, like you said, your sisters left, and you watched their faith just explode. And I think that's where that bridge, that meeting place is, rather than saying, well, you know what, you can't have this experience unless you do this. Well, maybe for you, yes. But maybe for someone else, there is that connection. There's ways of getting to God and having that one-on-one relationship with him. Right. And then, but again, this is where like you and I are right now, it's having that conversation without an agenda to understand, I need this. Why is it that you do not need what I need?
Yeah.
But yet you're having this phenomenal experience with God like I am, or even I'm not having. How are you having it and I'm not? Because I'm closer to him than you are.
Yeah, and I think even, just thinking of the conversation you and I are having right now, so the starting point is, well, Jimmy's my brother, John's my brother.
Mm-hmm.
That, we don't even have to say that about each other, but more often than not, people don't recognize that in one another. They don't recognize the person I'm talking to as a brother or a sister. Right. It seems like we recognize each other as an opponent.
It's a chess game.
Yeah, I'm not even trying to win you. I'm trying to win an argument.
Right.
And what we should be trying to do is listen to each other, learn from one another, be able to, be passionate about pursuing truth together, because I think truth matters.
Absolutely. I agree with that
But
100%.
yeah, like no one likes to be lied to, right? So
Right.
like we know truth matters. But, and then, as we are all in our pursuit of, in the pursuit of truth, learning to be patient with one another, love one another, and be okay with the fact that we're in different places right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge, like, I just presume that about you, and I think you do about me. That's a massive presumption for most people. We don't seem willing to grant the other, like, I assume your best interest in mind. More often than not, we seem to come at the other with, no, I think you have harm in mind for me, or I think there's something defective in you that I have to correct, as opposed to seeing in the other person someone else made in the image and likeness of God,
Mm-hmm.
who my first response is to love. It'd go a
Absolutely.
long way.
And it's hard. I mean, and I'll be honest, it's absolutely hard. And I think when we were chatting a few months back, and I made this comment to you when I was reading the Bible, and there was something that hit me, and I know we could talk about this forever, and there's another part that I want to get to is, we're trying to find that bridge and build together. But I know, again, we're here to encourage, build up one another, and yes, it's to bring people into the kingdom of God. But then I think sometimes, and this is hard for all of us, because you're right, it's we want to win or we want to pull you in, but then again, we still have a mind. We still think for ourselves. God gave us that free will, and let's say you and I are chatting with someone who's not even evangelical, not even Catholic. I mean, they're Muslim or Buddhist or whatever it is. Again, you could have a conversation with them, but if they choose not to follow, or even with your conversations, they're like, but this is what my family is and this is where I'm going to stay. We have to, and this is a hard thing to think about, we have to somewhere in our hearts understand that that's okay.
Yeah. Well,
which is hard to do.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. And so, I mean, I love a lot of people who hold opinions about things that I'm really passionate about, and would even say, like, in my mind, I'm convinced are truths.
Mm-hmm.
And they've come to different places on these, and I have to figure out how do I engage with you in such a way that I'm not continually trying to say, you're wrong about that. Right. that's probably a real productive relationship.
Yeah, because I think that's really going to bring them in, and then you guys are going to have coffee many times because you keep,
right.
You're wrong. No, you're wrong. It's like a sibling rivalry because, you're always wrong with your brothers and sisters.
Have I told you that lately, that you're wrong?
It's like, wait a minute. I think I had some marriages. I think I've heard that very, very often.
And so here's what I'd say right now. This is why this is, in my mind, this conversation that we're having is so urgent, because as we're talking, the backdrop of the culture that we're living in is, depending upon where you live, literally in flames.
Yes.
And we are literally now killing each other. We're assaulting each other. We're assaulting the different. And the church, I mean, Jesus says about us that we are supposed to be a city on a hill.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about this often, right? So you go to Europe and you see hill towns, say in Italy. So you build a city on a hill because it's a strategic advantage, right? You can see the army marching up. But you don't light up a city to protect it. And the image Jesus uses of what the church is supposed to be is like a lit up city on the top of a hill. And it's lit up so that the people who are down below in the valley, in the brambles and the thorns, who are lost and exhausted and beat up and discouraged and depressed and despairing, they can see that's where I can find help.
Right.
That's where there's refuge. That's where there's hope.
Right.
And right now in the culture, as it gets darker and darker, the people of God, like all of us, we have got to find a way to love one another and to help people understand that what they're longing for is attainable. What they're longing for is, I want to know that I matter. I want to know I'm worth the trouble. I want to know it's good that I exist. I want to know that I'm not defined by my past. I want to know that there's such a thing as justice. I want to know there's such a thing as forgiveness and mercy. All these things are supposed to be seen in the people of God. And the scandal right now is that we are not a city on a hill more often than not. We don't show forth hope. And the church is supposed to be speaking into this era that we're living in right now, giving people encouragement, because politics and law and policies and all those things are really important, but they ain't going to fix this problem. Because the problem is my heart's messed up for all these things that we're talking about. And God is the only person who can fix my heart, because law can't change my heart. It can just make me obey something. But it can't make me love. God can actually make me love. God can turn me, can change, so fundamentally change my attitudes, my behavior, that people I used to hate, I now see as my brother or my sister for whom I will lay down my life. That's what God does. And that's what we need. And we have to demonstrate that as the people of God.
And sometimes, you know, depending on what you grew up in, because I mean, for me, growing up, you're listening to the Daily Planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Olsen. I'm having a one-on-one with Father John Riccardo. But for me growing up, and then with this, and kind of get a response on that, and we'll move to the next piece. But I grew up where it was always that hellfire and brimstone preaching. So when pretty much it's almost like the pastor was like, if you didn't feel like an ant when you walked out the door, well, then he wasn't doing his job. Right. And there's not really, I mean, he might be talking about God's love, but how are you hearing love when you got a guy, you know, it's almost like somebody with a bullhorn. You guys might agree on something, but he's like in your face with his bullhorn. How's that going to pull you in?
Right. And so I have found it increasingly true that this age right now that we're living in, most people have never heard the story that is the gospel. Mm-hmm. And the easiest way I know how to explain, so I just wrote a book on this because I think it's that important. I think that, like, if I was born to do something, I think I was born to write this book. But I don't think most people know the story. The story in my mind is really as simple as 4 words: created, captured, rescued, and response. So each word answers like a really big question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Because God, out of his love, chose to create everything that is, and the highlight of everything he made is you and me, made in his image and likeness. So that's created. Captured. Okay, that sounds great, Padre. How come everything is so clearly messed up?
Yes, why?
Paper, you know? So because one of God's creatures who was good, out of envy of you and me and God's plan for you and me, tricked our race at the beginning of our history. And the result of that trick was we sold ourselves unknowingly into slavery to powers that we can't compete against. 2 primarily: death, which is pretty obvious, like I'm going to die, and sin. Like, I do a bunch in taxes, right? 3: death, taxes, and sin. So in other words, we got captured at the beginning of our history, and there's no way out on our own. Like, I can't overcome death. I can't do the things that I want to do. Like, why do I do the good, or why don't I do the good I want to do, and I end up doing the hate that I don't like, right? We've all had this experience. Like, there's things in our lives that we do or that we say that we know we shouldn't do or say, that we don't like doing or saying, that we even hate doing or saying. We do them anyway. Why? Because we got captured. Third question: what, if anything, has God done about this? He's done plenty. He became a man so as to rescue us. And that's the mission of Jesus. Jesus comes to rescue us from these powers we can't compete against, and to bring God's good creation back into freedom and into harmony with how he created us to be. That's rescued. And then the last word is, so if that's true, then how should I respond to it? And the response is not only surrendering my life to this God who so clearly loves me. He's become a man and gone to the cross to free me. But it's also, the response is, I want to live my life now in such a way that I can be an active agent in God's hands of recreating and transforming the world so that I can try best I can, with all my sins and inadequacies, to bring everything I do and everything I touch a little bit more into harmony with how God created us to be.
You're listening to The Daily Planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Olson, having a one-on-one with Father John Riccardo. Let's really go upon that response that you just said, because I think that is a perfect segue into the next part of this conversation. So we're talking about building that bridge, people coming together, evangelical, Catholic, just why is it that we are not able to get along? The Bible tells us that we're to take care of the poor, the orphans, the widows, the fatherless. So we're here to help them do better, feed them, whatever it is that they need, clothe them. So then now we have all these different organizations, either being Catholic charities, Lutheran Family Services. I know we have a Des Moines Pastoral Association here where I am. But now here's this question. You've got Methodists, you've got Lutheran, you've got Baptists, the list can go, on and on and on. Or you have the independent non-denominational churches. So God's calling you to help. God's calling you to be there for your community. So you have a small congregation, a small staff. You're barely getting people in there on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, just to attend. But you need to do something to help the community. Here's an odd question, and you could tell me that I'm completely nuts for even thinking this, which I've been told that before. But why is it that we could not figure a way that, okay, I'm this small church, we want to do something great or to help. What's that? And this could be the whole pride thing, but kind of stepping outside of their walls and going, hey, there's a Catholic charities that maybe we can reach out to them and try and partner with them to help them, either volunteering, financially, food bank. Whatever that is. What would be your thought for something like that to really show that togetherness?
Yeah, I would say that now is the urgent time for us as Protestants and Catholics to come together and think about how we, not whether we will do that, but what are the things that we can do to demonstrate to a culture which is losing hope.
So not a whether we can, but a
what should we do?
Right. When are we going to do this type of thing?
Yeah, exactly. So, and different places, right, have not only different places, but people within the different places. God puts, the way I think about it is, no one of us can help address all the many social ills that are going on in the culture. So
seriously,
he gives different ones of us, passions for the unborn or for the trafficked, or for the poor, for the homeless, for the hungry, for whatever it might be. So, and then those things oftentimes become predominant in various congregations. So,
sure.
A congregation's known for doing something for the homeless or whatnot. So great, if you got a couple of different places where their passion is taking care of the homeless or feeding the hungry or whatnot, so start looking around and go, who do we know in the Christian community outside our walls who shares this passion? And how can we get intentional and deliberate about coming together, not simply so we can be more effective, but so that we can be a better witness to the culture at large and invite people into seeing that city on a hill and knowing here's where people love each other.
Mm-hmm.
They don't call each other names. They don't throw things at each other. They're not tearing each other down. They're loving each other, and they're trying to make a difference in the community in which I live. That would go a long way. I think that's what's happening in the movement. At least my own experience, both in human trafficking and in abortion. Like I've seen a lot of people, across denominational lines.
Mm-hmm. I see that every day. Absolutely.
So it's no longer a question of if we're going to do this. It's a question of when and what are we going to do it over. We have to do this because no one else. The world is waiting. The country and the culture are waiting for the church to be what only she can be right now, and we're not offering any hope by and large.
Right. Too busy trying to find our differences and fighting from within rather than opening our arms and inviting each other in and figuring out how we can work together rather than always. I mean, and again, this isn't anything new because I think I've read this or heard this, and I know you've done a little more studying on some of this. You had to. But I mean, even they talked when Christ died, that Christianity at that point, there were already like 100 different sects is what they call it, which I guess we would call denominations today, of different people on who was following who. I mean, you're already seeing the people kind of pulling away from each other, and that was then.
Yeah, I mean, we're great at following personalities, and a guy I knew, I didn't know him personally, but I used to listen to him. He was an evangelical pastor. He used to say, it's a spin on Jesus's words. He used to say, "Where two or more are gathered in my name, there will be conflict." Which is,
gee, I wonder who that was.
Terribly true. It's just a riot. I think of it all the time. I mean, we can't get our own act together. Unfortunately, it's tragic.
It almost sounds like something that J. Vernon McGee would have said.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Father Riccardo, and hopefully I didn't go too far off in any weird direction with you. So.
No, I love, brother. Conversations like this are, like I say, ever more important right now in the world and the country that we're living in. So thanks for initiating it. It's a joy always to be talking to you. Absolutely. And again, if they want to find out more and maybe even, help support the Acts 29 ministries, how can they do that? Yeah, the website again is Acts 29, ACTSXXIX.org. There's included on that is there's a couple of videos that we've got up there. We were talking about the story and just, like learning, not the hellfire and brimstone thing, but like, what is the story? What is the gospel? So if you can't sleep one night, you're looking for a cure for insomnia, tune in. We'll help you sleep. So you mentioned that you had just written the book and everything. Now, are your books all available on that website too, or where could someone find your books? Yeah, or you can go to Amazon. So the book that's coming out, it's getting published. It's going to be available, I think, the middle of September. It's called Rescued, the shocking and unexpected story of the gospel. Fantastic. We've been chatting with Father John Riccardo, and you've been listening to The Daily Planet. It's a one-on-one with Father John. I'm Jimmy Olsen. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Daily Planet. This one-on-one has been with Father John Riccardo. If you enjoyed this, be sure to share it with your friends. You can also hear this podcast and many more by following along at Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And you can also listen to this one and other podcasts as well if you head over and follow my YouTube page, which is My Buddy Jimmy 101.